All right, let's play Armchair Developer for the day. I think it's a lot of fun to actually just kind of sit in comms with your friends and kind of talk about some of the changes that you would like to see in dungeons and kind of talk about some of the things that you have major grievances with after you run Mythic Plus, whether that be you deplete to something stupid, whether that be you see an interaction where you're like, that's not very fair. I would definitely like to see that change. And today, I'm going to be talking about some of the stuff that I would change in Mythic Plus if I were given the opportunity. Say I was a developer for one day. What are the things that I would change? And now there are probably a decent amount of things, but at the same point, I'm not going to say like, you know, completely delete Mythic Plus and bring back challenge mode, stuff like that. I'm actually going to talk about probably tangible things that could be changed over the course of an entire season. Maybe some of them a little bit less, but I think overall these are things that could be changed over the course of an entire season or an entire expansion. First and foremost, I'm nerfing Tyrannical. That shit is awful this season. I think that for me, I would nerf this down to 20% more HP. Maybe. It might be even lower. Tyrannical right now, I think a lot of people think Mythic Plus dungeons, and whenever they think of Mythic Plus dungeons, they believe that you actually spend most of your time fighting trash, or it's like an AoE situation, when in reality, there's a large portion of your time that's actually spent fighting bosses, especially as you scale higher into upper level keys. And now I know that this is like maybe more of an issue at like high-end key levels, but for me, I mean, this is the kind of player I am, right? I would actually nerf Tyrannical. I do not think that Tyrannical in this current state, with this current seasonal rotation, is okay at 30% more health and 15% increased damage. This shit's getting nerfed down to 20% more health and 10% increased damage. The bosses this season are so incredibly hard. And the amount of damage that you're doing relative to like timers and the keys, it has widely gotten out of control. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. Is something else I would change. That has wildly gotten out of control. And I would probably just nerf Tyrannical straight across the board. All of the bosses do a little bit less damage and then have a decent amount less HP just to try to get them more in line. It's kind of interesting because Fortified has been such a non-affix for such a long time. Non-boss enemies have 20% more HP, but if you actually take a look at what a dungeon looks like whenever you're looking through timers, you spend more time fighting bosses than you end up doing fighting trash. And this is, again, more of a thing at like a high end, but we spent 17 minutes out of our 31 minutes in this dungeon fighting bosses as opposed to fighting trash. Now, this is an Everbloom, but like, that's pretty consistent with general high-end keys. And in addition to that, if you take a look at this screenshot of this 26 Everbloom, if I pause it right here, and you see that we have 6.5 minutes going into the final boss, you think this is an easy timed key, don't you? We depleted this fucking key. We depleted! Like, I think that it because bosses scale so wildly out of control with Tyrannical just in general, I think that bosses like Yanlu, like Iridacron, like Tyr, what are other stupid bosses? Soulbound Goliath on Tyrannical. There are a lot of bosses that are actually scaled just so wildly out of control, either because they spawn ads, they have intermission phases. Iridacron's last stand phase on Tyrannical scales stupidly because that boss has a billion HP, and then it gets 30% more HP on top of it, and then you're supposed to do that last stand phase, and so on Fortified it's free, but on Tyrannical you have to save all of your offensive cooldowns even though they give you a haste buff. And so just in general, Tyrannical has proven time and time again to have major implications with dungeon scaling. And for me personally, I don't do Mythic Plus because I enjoy fighting bosses. If I was looking to try to fight bosses, I would do Raid. I think for me, bosses in Mythic Plus are just a means to an end. I'm looking for large trash pulls that I find fun to do. I'm looking for unique routing strategies that I'm able to implement inside of my keys. And those are the kind of things that I'm looking for whenever I'm actually doing a Mythic Plus dungeon. I'm not looking to fight a 6-minute boss. If I was looking to fight a 6.5-minute boss, I would go do Raid. I would go fight the first boss on Mythic or something like that if I'm looking to fight a 6.5-minute boss. So that's definitely the first thing is Tyrannical. I would also... So I think the bosses themselves also need some looking into in general. I think that, Soulbound Goliath. So, for those who don't know, people have started wearing Medallion, the PvP Medallion on Soulbound Goliath to get out of the stun. I think that this boss is horrible. I would rework this boss. I think that there are a couple bosses themselves that I would rework, and this is first and foremost on the list. There is zero counterplay to the Soul Thorns. You can't defensive while you're inside of it unless you have Bark Skin, but you can't defensive while you're inside the Soul Thorns. You don't know if it's going on you, so you can't pre-defensive it. It's random, and on top of that, the Soul Thorns have so much HP that it just reduces the ability to be able to kill off the boss, and then it's like you're stunned. Like there's no counterplay. I would probably change it to where you actually just aren't stunned by the Soul Thorns. You walk your thorn into the fire and then it goes away, as opposed to whatever it is right now. Alternatively, and I think this is probably an easy change, they can make it to where you're just not stunned and you're actually able to contribute damage to these Soul Thorns, because right now they have so much HP, and God forbid you have an Aug Evoker in your group and the Aug Evoker doesn't get picked, because then that's half of your group's CPS just completely going down the drain. And so that's like it's just so stupid. I would nerf this boss. Second boss of Everbloom, I'm gutting the bolts. I think that the bolts on this fight do way too much damage to your group, especially if you miss a kick. And it's like, if you have a prop paladin, it's trivial. If you have a prop paladin and a warlock, it's even more trivial. If you have anything else, then it's just like the hardest boss ever, especially at like a high level. Archmage Soul, Cinderstorm Volley, as it currently stands, by the way, for those who don't know, Cinderstorm Volley on Archmage Soul has 16 unique hits. And these 16 hits go out onto all players, and you would think that they're spread evenly, and that's not true. Instead, how the Cinderstorm Volley works is you can actually get a range between 1 and 4 hits of the volley on Archmage Soul, and it's random. There's no way of controlling how many hits you're going to get. There's no way of knowing how much of a personal you're going to need to press in advance. I would normalize that mechanic to probably just do 3 hits a person in total, and we're just cutting it down to 15, and everybody gets hit 3 times by the Cinderstorm Volley, as opposed to it being a variance between 1 and 4. Because, I mean, on top of that too, whenever you have a player die, then the hits start to be spread between the remaining 4 people in your group. I'm just hitting people 3 times with the Cinderstorm Volley, I think, every single time, just to normalize how much damage you're taking and to make it a lot more predictable. There's another boss that I forgot to even talk about that I'm going to have to record this after the fact and edit it in because I think it's so dumb. Yasma got changed to have racking pain actually be applied to players and not be kickable. For some reason, racking pain just does the most damage now, and it like one-shots you on a 27 Tyrannical, and God forbid if you have an overlap happen with the Soul Rend, like then you just also either press a 50% DR or die. That's not very fair. That doesn't feel okay. Next up, I'd be looking at some timers and some keys. Fall has way too much time. Ataldazar is far too easy, and the Blackrock Hold timer I would probably be taking a look at in general. Now, so there's a couple problems here. So first and foremost, those dungeons are very easy, but you're going to run into problems where you're actually getting one-shot by bosses, particularly like Blackrock Hold and Yasma and Ataldazar, before before any of these things happen. And this happens because we have way too much damage relative to key timers this season, or relative to like HP scaling of the mobs. So either one of two things I think needs to happen. Either all mobs across every single dungeon needs to do about probably like 15% less damage, or alternatively, we just have 15% more HP whenever we enter a Mythic Plus dungeon. That's going to at least help normalize timers relative to the damage that we're doing inside of the Mythic Plus dungeons, because right now it's completely out of whack. And this is another one of the reasons that the bosses are super hard, but just the scaling as we currently have is completely out of whack relative from our damage relative to our HP pools. But the timer in Fall, Ataldazar is way too easy. Blackrock Hold timer is probably too lenient. I have this like a question mark on my notes, just because it's like, a bit closer if you're hovering over some of these runs. It's still like not a hard timer, but then you look at Ataldazar, it's a 30-minute timer and people are 3 minutes under the timer. Fall, a common situation in Galakron's Fall is that you have 15 deaths and you're still 5 minutes under the timer because that timer is so lenient. So I'd be looking at the timers in those dungeons. Alternatively, I'd probably add another minute to Rise. I would actually genuinely probably rework the sand area in Rise. Rise has to be by far my least favorite dungeon of the season. A lot of that comes down to the fact that the first area in Rise isn't particularly fun, and then the sand gauntlet trash that you have to fight is also particularly bad. Again, I don't do dungeons just to fight bosses or to fight 3 mobs at a time or to have my routing completely limited. I actually think the first area of Rise is mostly fine, but I think that sand gauntlet is horrendous. I would completely change how that gauntlet works, and I'd probably add a minute to the Rise timer as well, just to make it a bit more I don't want to say lenient, because it's not even a lenient timer. That the timer in there is so hard. The dungeon's only been done on 27, I believe. I don't think it's actually gone over 27 on Tyrannical. I think that for some reason people are able to do 29s of other keys, but for Rise you actually can't even do a 28. Okay, next thing, bolstering. It's out of there. I think that bolstering sucks. I was looking at next week's affixes, and it involves bolstering, and we were talking about playing next week, and we decided that it was a good week to only get eight dungeons done and then not show back up. And I think that that's not very fun whenever you have a situation where you're like, oh, the affixes look kind of horrible. What if we just played a different week? I think that by itself is not a very engaging experience with Mythic Plus. Mythic Plus has actually been quite good this season. And if I saw a post on the front page competitive WoW subreddit talking about how many dungeons are being done right now. And it's actually keeping up with season 1 with the amount of completions for dungeons, which is quite nice. But I will say that affixes like bolstering definitely are so unfun to play that some people will just like either stop playing for that week or stop playing for the season, or just don't want to do Mythic Plus anymore because the affix is just like that, not like that bad. Still, like it's been nerfed so many times, and it's still the worst affix, and it's still hard, and there's not much counterplay to it. Like there is some counterplay in the sense of like you can route around it, but I don't think that there's enough counterplay. I would actually be probably down for an affix rework, but that's more of like an expansion level change that I would go with. Again, this is not necessarily in the scope of today's video, but that's more of like an expansion level change that I would certainly be going with, is like a complete affix rework. Those are, off the top of my head, overall the biggest changes I would make to Mythic Plus if I was a developer for a day. Obviously, these would not happen over a day, but if I was a developer, those are probably the biggest changes I would make to Mythic Plus to try to make it a little bit more enjoyable for the player base. I'm interested in what you guys have to say about what your most enjoyable changes would be. Are you guys actually having problems with, some of the trash in some of the dungeons? Is there major grievances with some of the other keys that you guys think is problematic? Overall, just kind of what are your thoughts? Because these are mine, obviously, and these come from a lens of somebody who does relatively high-end keys. But I'm interested in hearing everybody's kind of opinion as to what they are looking for if they were trying to make changes inside these dungeons. Yeah, that's it. That's the end of the video, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.